22. It had occurred too late to Kentrell that he and Gorst would be at a great disadvantage when they attempted to climb the mirror. When last they had done so, it had been with torches to guide them through the dark. The captain had only recalled that fact just as Zahiel's spell had taken effect. But by then, the chamber and the necromancer had already faded away. To his surprise, however, Zahiel had evidently considered the problem too, and dealt with it. Upon materializing on the mountainside, Kentrell immediately noticed that the utter darkness of the shadow had given way to a deep gray, which enabled the mercenary to see at least some distance in every direction. Gorst, too. He had gained this ability. The spellcaster clearly could not have altered the essence of the shadow itself, which meant that he had instead granted his companions a crude form of night vision. Unfortunately, that gift had also shown them that Zahiel had not been able to send them as near to the key as they might all have wished. Two fighters had been left with quite a climb. "We're probably gonna need some rope along the way," Gorst muttered. Another thing Kentrell had not gotten to mention prior to the necromancer's spell, and this time one that Zahiel had also failed to anticipate. Kentrell eyed the path above, trying to find a better route, but the ridge upon which they had been set offered only one direction. "We'll just have to try to find it anyway," he finally replied. Gorst nodded. He said no more. If his captain intended to try to make the ascent without equipment, then so would he. With utmost caution, they began to wind their way up. Kentrell had no way to estimate the hour, but if they suffered few missteps, he suspected that they could reach the top and have some time to spare. Of course, that also depended on whether or not Zahiel could keep Juris Khan occupied long enough. He tried not to think of the necromancer's potential sacrifice. The odds seemed very low that Zahiel would survive. Kentrell had witnessed the power of their treacherous host too often to believe that. Zahiel would do what he could to keep Khan at bay, but sooner or later, Ure's mad monarch would kill the Rathmanian. Kentrell could only hope it would be later. Otherwise, they had all lost. Up and up they climbed, and still no attack came. The captain had little time to think of much else, but as they drew nearer to the top of the peak, his thoughts went back to Etana. Despite what she had proven to be, Kentrell found some of his earlier memories too precious to simply discard. Perhaps if things had been different, if he had not learned the truth beforehand, he might even willingly have accepted his father's offer of immortality. But then he would have to live with the results. Pausing, he took a deep breath. Tried to clear his head. It made no sense to keep thinking of Etana. He had seen the last of her. The last of a robed figure stood atop a tiny ledge farther up. Even as distant as the figure was, Kentrell could tell that he did not stare at Lord Khan. "Etana!" he shouted. The wind blew dust in his face. Turning away, the mercenary brushed his eyes clear. When he looked back, the figure had disappeared. "What was it?" Gorst called from behind. "Do you see something?" "I thought I saw..." But Kentrell stopped. If it had been Etana, surely she would have either come closer or destroyed him from the ledge. She would not have simply just gone away. That made no sense whatsoever. "Nothing," he finally answered. "Just my imagination." They pushed on, despite constant fears that they would eventually reach some spot where they could not overcome with equipment, the mercenaries' route continued to offer some avenue. Had Zail somehow managed to send the pair to the easiest area upon which to climb? If so, then he managed more than with what power he had drained from the ruins than he had given the fighters to expect. "We're almost there," Kentrell dared finally mutter to his friend. "Almost," Gorse grunted. Almost still meant quite a climb to go. Reaching up, Captain Dumont seized hold of a promising outcropping, only to have the part he had taken crumble in his hand. Momentarily out of balance, he leaned toward the rock face. At the same time, his gaze went from upward to deep down. Far below, something that resembled a swarm of ants moved with incredible swiftness up the side of the mountain. The captain gaped. "Gorst! You see that?" The giant stretched. "I see it. What is it, Kentrell?" "I don't." So quickly did the shapes move that even in the short time in which the pair had talked of them, they, now, could be seen with a bit more clarity. They were large, each easily the size of a man, and in general built like men. They had a grayish tone to them, although he saw bits and pieces of other colors on their backs, their arms, and their legs. Kentrell swallowed. "Shiray's people. They're coming after us." He pictured hundreds of gaping mouths, the withered, cadaverous shells of what had once been human. Can you imagine those talon-like nails and hungry faces? The captain could well imagine what had happened to Albert and the others, and understood that now the same fate rushed toward them. "We have to get up top, quick!" They could only move as fast as their surroundings permitted, and although the pair struggled mightily, it seemed that the voracious horde moved at more than 10 times the pace. The top beckoned, yet was still too far up. Exhausted, Kentrell and Gorst finally had to pause on a small ridge barely wide enough to accommodate both of them. Gazing down at their pursuers, Kentrell swore. "They climb as if born at the mountain. At this rate, they'll catch us just below our goal." Gorst nodded. "We can't make it. But you can." Kentrell eyed the other. "What does that mean?" With absolute calm, the giant began freeing his axe, which was hung around on his back. "This best spot around. I'll hold him off. You go on." "Don't be a fool, Gorst. If anyone's staying behind, it's me. You go out there. I'll hold him off." The other mercenary, he shook his head. He stretched one long arm out, the axe extended well beyond it. The weapon would have taken his friend both hands to wield. "You see? I've got twice the reach you do, Kentrell. We need that. I'm the best choice to stay, and you know it. Besides, I owe you for the last time we climbed up here." Gorst. Captain Dumont knew better than continue to argue. Of all the men he'd ever met, Gorst, he had to be the most stubborn. They could have argued until Uray's abominations overwhelmed them, and still, the wild-maned warrior would have stood his ground. Taking one last glance down, Kentrell nodded. "All right, if you find a chance to save yourself, do it. Don't worry about me."
I'll do what I can. You better get going.
Kentrell put a hand on his friend's shoulder. May your arm be steady.
May your weapon be sharp.
Gorst returned, finishing the old mercenary litany. Steeling himself, the captain started up the final leg of the mountain. He pulled himself up toward the top, trying not to think of what the giant would face and hoping somehow that they could both get out of this chaos alive. If he could make it to the top before the creatures reached Gorst, perhaps Kentrell could save him. All he had to do was destroy the key. The encouraging thought pushed him to renewed effort. Closer and closer he came to the plateau. Rising above it, Kentrell could make out the crystal's resting place. Such an irony now that he had to undo what he and his men had struggled so hard to accomplish earlier. A hissing sound rose below him. Cursing, Kentrell pushed harder. The edge lay just a few yards up. Only a little longer. Gorst let out a battle cry. Despite knowing better, the captain had to look. The giant stood at the edge of his small perch, swinging away with his axe at the first of the demonic creatures to reach him. With little room to maneuver, the abomination could not avoid the attack. The axe bit hard into its head, cutting deep. The creature let out a horrific sound, then toppled backward off the ledge. Wasting not a moment, the giant shifted his grip and used the very top of the axe to shove a second adversary off. Despite those two rapid successes, though 100 more moved up, each trying to beat the rest to the lone defender. Nearly frantic now, Kentrell struggled to reach the plateau. However, each yard seemed a mile, and he felt as if he were climbing through molasses. A very human roar of pain from below shook him to the very core and made the fighter look down again. The ghoulish creatures harried Gorst from every direction. Two had managed to get up on the ledge, and another sought a handhold near the giant's feet. A dozen others maneuvered for position around the lone mercenary. Gorst landed a strong blow against one ghoul still wearing the battered remains of a breastplate and chainmail. The blade severed the upper part of the fiend's torso, but that upper portion still managed to wrap bony fingers around the upper part of the weapon's shaft. And although he shook the axe as hard as he could, Gorst could not dislodge the determined ghoul. The effort had also hampered his struggles against the others. The second demon leapt onto his back and tried to sink its horrific mouth into Gorst's neck. Spinning around, the giant threw his axe down upon one seeking a handhold. Both that creature and the one still clinging onto the weapon plunged earthward, taking the axe with them. Now, unarmed, Gorst reached back and seized the monster latched onto his back. Unfortunately, it would not be easily removed as the others, and while Gorst battered with it, 4 more made their way up to him. Kentrell continued his ascent, but with each step his gaze flashed back to his friend. When he next glanced, it was now to see the giant hampered by 3 of the horrors. With more than only seconds away, Gorst's shoulders were stained with blood, and despite his strength, he clearly had trouble standing. The captain nearly turned back, thinking for a second if he could just join the fighter, they could hold off the entire horde. However, common sense quickly pointed out the futility of this thought. Gorst had remained behind to give Kentrell time to do what had to be done. To turn back now would be a waste of the other mercenary's sacrifice. Sacrifice. Only now did the essence of that word truly sink in. At that moment, Gorst let out a battle cry so loud it echoed well beyond the mirror. As if his strength had suddenly been renewed by some magical means. The massive fighter strained, raising one of the fiendish foes into the air. By this time, at least a dozen more of Juris Khan's monstrous children had fastened themselves onto him, ripping at his flesh, tearing away his life. Still roaring, Gorst suddenly charged forward. "No!" shouted Kentrell, his plea repeated over and over and over again by the mountains. The giant leapt off the ledge. Unable to let go in time, his many attackers fell with him. Gorst leapt so far, he was far less of an athletic man than Captain Dumont knew the mercenary capable of, barely enabled the wild-maned fighter to clear his perch. However, Gorst had obviously had that thing in mind, for as he dropped, he crashed into one climbing abomination after another, creating in the process an avalanche of monstrous forms raining down upon the shadowed kingdom. Gorst! Kentrell could not tear his eyes away from the dwindling figure. Gorst had been with the captain longer than anyone. The giant had seemed invisible, unstoppable. Tears struggled to be free, but Kentrell could not let them come. Taking a deep breath, he looked away and began pulling himself up again. Gorst's last ferocious charge burned into his imagination. The sun could not be long rising. Kentrell had to make certain that he had not just let his friend, all his men, die in vain. Nearer and nearer he drew to the top, and below him, the horde closed the gap more quickly. Zael screamed, and not for the first time. He screamed loud and long, but he did not give in. His clothes were in tatters, and every inch of his body seemed to be either covered in blood or pounding in agony. But he did not surrender. Yet neither had he come an inch closer to the Key of Shadow. Seemingly untouched by every one of the powerful spells Zael had tossed at him, Juris Khan approached the battered, half-dead figure. "Your determination, if not your cause, is quite admirable, necromancer. Shame that your corrupted soul shall be lost to Diablo forever. As is yours. Even until the end, you persist to try to twist matters, eh?" Lord Khan shook his head in the most paternal manner, something that all of Zael's good training could not help but greatly irritating the necromancer. "Your blessed archangel is Diablo himself. You could not see that." But Uri's monarch could not. So thoroughly had the demon done his work, Zael even understood how it happened, for Juris Khan clearly had been greatly full of pride in himself. He had been Lord of the holiest of kingdoms, the symbol of piety and goodness, and because of that, he had not been able to comprehend the most evil and cunning of demons who had played him for a fool. A powerful fool. However, he had taken everything that Zael could thrust at him, taken it and shrugged it off. Little more remained to the necromancer save his dagger, which might have done him some good if he could have distracted his foe somehow. At least then Zael could have tried to circumvent Khan's defenses and perhaps wound the other. What could he do, though? Every attempt had been more than met. There existed only words, and Zael had few left of those as well. Still, he tried, hoping against hope that Juris Khan would be wrong, that somehow Kentrell Dumont and Gorst had made it to the other stone. Yet, if they had, would this battle still be going on? And where is your archangel anyway, my lord? Perhaps if he were here, then we could prove, once and for all, whether I lie. Surely, that is not too much for us to ask, is it? Then again, maybe it is. I need not ask of Miracotus that he prove himself to me unbeliever, for I have seen his gifts at work, and I have faith in his word. If he would choose to speak with us now, it would be by his choice alone, not yours or mine. Juris Khan loomed over the necromancer. Make peace with heaven, thief of the dead. For but in a few moments your tongue shall still forever. And so then shall end your lies. Zael had no reason to doubt him. As the robed monarch approached, Zael prayed that Dringao would guide his soul to the next plane of battle, not let Khan's true master seize it and drag it down to hell. And, as if hearing his prayer, a voice suddenly boomed. Juris Khan! Juris Khan! I would speak with you! Both men froze. Khan's mouth opened and closed. He glanced at Zael again, then looked up to the ceiling. The voice boomed. Juris Khan! Noble servant! 'Tis I, your benefactor! Your archangel! The weathered face contorted into an expression of reverence and wonder. Lord Khan raised his hands above his head in a beseeching manner and called out, Miracotus! Great Miracotus! You bless us with your humble attendant, with your presence. Much quieter, the voice calling itself that of the archangel suddenly muttered to the necromancer. If you've got anything left to give, lad, do it now. Needing no more urging, Zael dove toward his foe, focusing his will entirely on his dagger. He now thrust at the robed figure's chest. The beatific look upon Juris Khan's countenance vanished in an instant, replaced by one of the darkest angers. You! Khan seemed unable to find any words to fit his fury. Through watery eyes, the necromancer saw the blood dripping from the other's wound. He had missed the heart, but certainly came close enough to it to injure his opponent gravely. Where is your archangel now? Zael managed to spout. He seems to have abandoned you, my lord. Impotent fool! The insane ruler leaned against the shield he had created for the key to Shadow. I need but a few moments. Then I will heal myself. A few moments you yourself do not have. A horribly familiar noise arose from the mouth of the chamber. Zaya heard the movement of many eager feet. He forced himself to turn his gaze toward the entrance. One of the ghoulish denizens of the Holy Kingdom thrust its macabre head inside. Two more quickly followed suit. His strength on the wane, Zail's bone barrier had finally given way, releasing the hungry fiends. Juris Khan, his breath still ragged, pointed at the sprawled necromancer. "There he is, my children! There's the one you seek!" Their rounded mouths opened in anticipation. The deathly gaps where their eyes had once been fixed upon Zail. The horrific creatures reached for him, and Zail knew that he did not have anything left to fight them with. With his little remaining physical strength, he weakly held the dagger before him, hoping that he would at least stop one before the rest ripped him to bloody shreds. Despite all of his teachings, despite all of his trainings, at that moment, the necromancer dearly wanted to be alive. "Now, there remains but one," Khan pronounced, his voice already much stronger than earlier. His wound clearly bled less, and his visage, while monstrous in its own right, did not show much agony from the near-fatal blow. Zail had guessed wrong. The power behind Juris Khan, the false archangel, protected well his valuable puppet. Diablo, if the captain had guessed correctly, desired Ure to spread its gift to the world and open the path for Hell's legions. "No, there remains but one," that almost demonic figure repeated. He straightened in obvious preparation for his departure from the cavern chamber. "And who knows?" Khan continued, smiling piously. "Perhaps not even one, eh?" And as the horde suddenly rushed to tear Zail apart, Juris Khan vanished. To ensure the doomed spellcaster knew that his last question would become truth. Had the sun yet risen? Under the shroud-like cover of the enchanted shadow, Kentrell could not be certain, but he hoped and prayed that it had not done so. With Gorst and surely Zail now also dead, it would be the greatest shame to have come so far and yet fallen short. He managed to drag himself onto the small plateau, but discovered that he did not immediately have the strength to stand, much less continue on. Lying on the harsh, cold ground, the captain inhaled, trying to catch his breath. Just a few moments more. That's all he needed. Just a few moments more. The sudden clatter of rock from just below the edge warned him that even those few moments would not be granted. Body shrieking, Kentrell forced himself back to his feet, staggered toward the final climb, knowing that his goal lay only a short distance up, but wondering if he could climb so great a height at this point. There came more clattering. The captain looked back to see a withered, dead hand reaching up. He turned and ran toward it. A terrifying face came up, the grayish vision granted Kentrell by Zail, making it appear even more deathly. Mustering his courage, the mercenary kicked at it as hard as he could. With a shriek befitting a damned soul, the ghoulish creature tumbled backward into the air, vanishing below. Kentrell leaned over the edge, saw that 4 more were a minute or so from reaching the top, with at least a dozen more right behind. Dragging himself up to the rock formation, Captain Dumont started his last ascent. He had to make it. No, he would make it. "Come on, you damn recruit!" he muttered at himself as he grabbed hold. You can climb 5 times faster than this! Foot by foot, inch by inch, Kentrell drew closer. From the east, he noticed no hint of the sun, surely a good sign. By now, he had to be near the very upper edge of the shadow, which should have enabled him to make out some light if any existed. That, Kentrell did not had meant that the day had not yet dawned. Then, shattering his rising hopes, he heard once more the all too familiar hissing. Kentrell immediately looked down, knowing already that he would see the first of the demonic horde had reached the plateau. They scrambled around at first, seeking him out. One looked up, noticed him. That's all the rest needed. The first of them scurried to the rock tower, eager no doubt for Kentrell's tasty flesh. Fortunately, not every part of the outcropping presented a place for the ghoulish hunters to use to climb up. Some started along the captain's own route, while others tested paths elsewhere, seeking one that would hold them. Their hunger for his flesh and blood clearly getting the better of them. A pair hurried to the western side, no doubt in hopes of beating the rest to the quarry. They did not get far, as Kentrell watched in astonishment. The two suddenly flared bright, almost as if on fire. Their screams caused the rest of the monstrous pack to hesitate. The two started back to their companions, but as they moved, pieces of their dried flesh turned to ash, and the bone beneath began to sag, as if made from ever-softening wax. One fell, already a half-melted parody of a human dead that became more liquid with each second. The other managed to reach with what surely had to be the edge of the shadow, but not soon enough to save it. It too collapsed into a stomach-churning heap that proved too disturbing a sight that the rest of the creatures did what they could to avoid even venturing near it. Kentrell suddenly became aware that the ones just below him had started moving again. Cursing his own morbid fascination with the horrific destruction of the pair, he pulled himself up as hard as he could, trying to make up for the lost opportunity. He almost made it too slowly. A hand nearly caught his left foot. Kicking at it, the captain managed to shatter some of the fingers, slowing the ghoul down. His own hand suddenly caught the uppermost edge. Heart pounding, blood racing, Kentrell pulled himself up and caught the first glimpse to the key to Light's resting place. It had not, of course, changed much. A thin layer of frost covered everything, including, by this point, the veteran fighter himself. Carefully checking his footing, Kentrell headed toward his prize. Something stirred up by his boot rattled toward the gem. The bone he had earlier dug up free, the last trace of his predecessor, the unfortunate priest Tobio. Trying not to think about how he might soon be joining the late clergyman, Captain Dumont approached the key to Light. As he did, he noticed that its brightness had remained constant, but not overwhelming. In fact, it seemed a little more illuminating than its counterpart well below the earth. "It doesn't matter," Kentrell chided himself. "Let it glow as bright as the sun, or stay as dark as the caverns. Just grab the thing and be done with it." He reached for the crystal. Atana's beautiful face suddenly filled his mind. Filled it so much that he almost imagined that he'd be floating before him, covering the entire shadowed heaven. "My darling Kentrell," the face said. "My sweet, sweet Kentrell. How I yearn for your arms again." The captain hesitated, caught between duty and emotion. "Come back to me, Kentrell. Come back to me," she went, her eyes glittering in that way it always had, mouth pursed as if hungry for kisses. "Let us be together again. Together For all time. All time? That notion stirred him to action again. He wanted nothing of Juris Khan's gifts, especially that one. But despite his determination, he could not escape Atana's siren song. As the captain touched the surprisingly warm gem, she filled his head with new words. More promises. Darling, sweet Kentril, loving Kentril, there's so much we can give each other. I was so lonely until I saw you, and when you showed me the brooch, I knew that heaven had promised you to me. Come back to me. All will be well. We will be one. Get out of my head, Kentril snapped, shutting his eyes as he tried to force the image, the smell, and the taste of Atana from his memory. Get out of my... A hiss barely alerted him in time. From behind him came one of Lord Khan's vile children, a hairless, gauntless cadaver dressed in soiled garments of a merchant. A rusted medallion, still containing a few valuable gems, dangled from a neck chain, half buried in the ghoul's shriveled, hollow neck. Fine wares today, it babbled. Good pots! Good pots, fresh from the kiln! Whether the monstrosity knew it or not, the words unnerved the seasoned mercenary, yet another morbid reminder that what faced him had once been just a fellow man. Kentril swung hard with his left, landing a powerful punch to the chest. His hand sank up to the knuckles, and dried flesh and old bone giving away. However, the blow only sent the horrific creature back a couple steps. Without hesitation, Kentril kicked with one foot. This time he caught his adversary's leg, flipping the ghoul over. Unable to control its momentum, the creature slid to the far side, slipping over the edge. Again, Captain Dumont gripped the crystal. He ripped it free, then looked to the east. Still, no sign of daylight. He would have early at least thought, but all he had to do was destroy the artifact. But Atana's voice and face filled his mind once more, making it difficult to tell what was real and what was imaginary. Kentril had trouble recalling just what he had been intending to do. Kentril, my darling Kentril, my one and only love. Come back to me. Forget this foolishness. She floated before him in a silver gossamer gown, arms outstretched toward him, beseeching him. To Kentril, Atana, far more resembling an angel than even the false Murakotis had been. How breathtaking she was. How beguiling. He took a step toward her. A thing smelling of the stench of a grave fell upon him. Kentril hit the icy ground hard, the crystal rolling from his grip. Both he and his attacker slid dangerously near the edge. The captain grimaced as a rounded mouth snapped at him. The ghoulish, fetid breath, almost as deadly as the weapon as his teeth, managed to get his knee up. Kentril pushed at the horror away. He scrambled for the key, but his foe grabbed his arm and pulled the mercenary back. Beyond the creature, Captain Dumont saw with mounting dismay that 3 others had made it up, and now converged on him. Unable to pull his sword free, Kentril managed at least to draw his dagger. He stabbed at the hand that held him, chopping at the bone and the decayed skin. The fingers loosened its grip enough for the arm so that Kentril could draw his sword free. He carefully backed toward his prize. The larger blade did nothing to daunt the gathering fiends. They moved toward him as quickly as the slick surface enabled them. Kentril thrust at the nearest, then swung wide at 2 others following. He managed to strike one of the latter, but not enough to do any damage. At last he reached the key to light, fending off the cursed citizens of Ure. The captain scooped it up. "Stop!" he shouted as best as he could. The cold and his own exhaustion have taken their toll. Stop! Or I'll throw it off right now. The creatures paused. Kentril had them. But for how long? They would not simply wait until the sun rose and destroyed them. Even now, others could be heard winding their way up the other shadowed sides. It would take only a single lapse in the concentration for Kentril to fall prey to one or more of them. You would not do that! Not when you so much wish to live. A face appeared in his mind, but not Atana's this time. Instead, Juris Khan seemed to stare at Kentril from within the fighter's skull to see what the captain tried to hide from himself, that he very much wanted to live, wanted some way to escape, and clearly had no escape. Kentril! My good captain! You can live, and live well! Love, and love well! A kingdom can be yours! Captain Dumont saw himself at the head of the magnificent force. His armor is brilliant, as majestic as the Lord of Khan's archangel. He saw himself standing before the cheering throngs, spreading the goodwill of Ure to all. Kentril even saw himself sitting upon the very throne occupied by Juris Khan, Atana at his side, and their beautiful children perched near his feet. Then the godlike figure of Khan swelled to life before his eyes, seeming to rise up all the way from the city below, filling the sky. A gracious smile on his regal visage, the gigantic monarch reached forth a gargantuan hand toward Kentril, offering him escape, and all else the mercenary had envisioned. Replace the key! Come home, my good captain! Come home, my son! Kentril felt his will slipping away, felt himself ready to accept everything that the gigantic figure offered, even if that wondrous offer, in truth, masked an awful horror. Then Kentril thought of Zael, who surely had to be dead if Juris Khan had come here. He thought of Albort, Jodis, Breck, Orlif, and the rest of the company, victims of the monstrous evil into which the captain had blithely led them. Most of all, he recalled Gorst, who had just sacrificed his life for his friend, his comrade. Gorst, who had not hesitated to do what had to be done. Throwing aside his blade, Captain Kentril Dumont clutched the artifact to his body and ran off the edge of the peak. He closed his eyes as he did, not wanting to see the oncoming rocks below. The wind pushed at his face, his body as if trying to tear the key to light from his death grip. Kentril imagined himself crashing on the mountainside, becoming battered to a pulp by the crystal, shattering it in the process. Then the wind, the sense of falling, ceased. The captain opened his eyes to find himself floating in the air. No, not floating. The ethereal hand of the giant Juris Khan held him, its ghostly fingers wrapped around his body. The look of the patriarch's huge face appeared anything but kindly now. Put it back, Kentril Dumont. Put it back now. Staring at the gigantic visage, the mercenary could not help but to think of how much Lord Khan now resembled his sinister archangel. The eyes especially held that demonic intensity, and the more Kentril looked, the more the face seemed to shift, to grow less human, more hellish. Put it back, and you may live. But despite Khan's mutilating countenance, despite the crushing fingers on the ghostly hand, Kentril would not. Better death. Better every bone broken and his life fluid splattered across the earth below. Then let this spread across the world. He raised the key to light high, trying to throw it down upon the city. His arms would not move. They would not move, no matter how hard, Kentrell had tried. The face of Juris Khan had lost all trace of humanity. Now he more than little resembled the abominations his people had become. His skin shriveled, and his mouth took on a hungry, loathsome cut. The eyes burned with a fury not of heaven, but of well below. Return the key, or I shall shred your skin from your pathetic body. Remove your heart while it beats, and devour it before your pleading eyes. Kentrell tried not to listen, choosing instead to concentrate on salvaging his mission. Where was the damn sun anyways? How much longer before it finally rose? He could not longer breathe, barely even think. A part of the mercenary begged him to take Lord Khan's offer, even if that meant that would not be truly trusted. Anything but to suffer longer. Everything began to go black. At first, Kentrell believed that he had started to pass out, but then the captain realized that Zael's spell had begun to wear off. Kentrell could still make out the ever more hideous form of his host, but little else. Ure had become a dark, undefined shape. Even the mountains nearby, only murky forms. A bare hint of gray touched the eastern horizon, but other than that, a hint of gray? No sooner had Captain Dumont noted that he felt warmth in his hands. He forced his eyes upward, saw that a faint glow of the key to light had increased. And, as he quickly returned his gaze to the pinpoint of the grayness far beyond the Shadow Kingdom, Kentrell knew that the night had finally come to an end. With renewed determination, he held the crystal toward the gigantic phantasmal form, putting every bit of effort he could into resisting Juris Khan's control. Kentrell shouted, "You put it back!" He threw the key. The huge ghostly hand reached for the stone, but as it tried to seize the artifact, the latter flared as brightly as the morning sun. The key to light completely burned its way through the ethereal palm, then sailed unhindered toward the city below. Juris Khan roared, a combination of rage and pain. "Fool!" bellowed the giant in Kentrell's head. "Corrupt soul! You shall be..." He got no further, for at that moment the gleaming crystal struck against something. It shattered, and from within burst forth an intense blinding light that rushed all out in all directions as if seeking to take in everything in its blazing embrace. The area around the broken artifact seemed to erupt with day. Ure, the mountain Amir, the surrounding jungle, nothing escaped the glorious illumination unleashed by the death of Khan's creation. A wave of pure sun caught the scores of horrific pursuers still perched atop the peak or clinging onto its side. The cursed folk of the once holy city screamed and shrieked as they melted, burning away before Kentrell's sickened eyes. By the dozen, those that had not yet made it to the top plummeted earthward. Molten blobs that left fiery stains upon Namir's ever more battered flank. And as the light coursed over Ure, building by building, those structures withered, crumbled, returning to the decayed, empty shells that Kentrell and the others had first discovered. Walls fell in, ceilings collapsed. The effects of centuries of exposure to the elements took their toll once more, but this time in scarcely a minute. From everywhere, the howls and cries of the damned souls of Ure filled Kentrell's ears, threatened to drive him to madness. He felt more pity than anything else for the creatures that had slaughtered his friends. They had been turned into abominations by the man that they had most trusted, infested by demons who used their drained husks as a gate to the mortal world. Perhaps now they could find eternal rest. Then, Juris Khan, too, began to twist, to mutilate. Kentrell tumbled through the air, not falling, but not exactly floating either. He caught glimpses of the monstrous shadow figure as the first ray struck. washed as it corrupted lord of the realm was transformed. Juris Khan became even less than a man, more of a beast. Quickly went the face and the form that had matched his people in horror. Now the elder ruler truly revealed the evil within him, the evil that could only be of Diablo. And there, rising momentarily above the vanishing giant, a creature of hell, a tusked, fanged figure of dread roared its anger at Kentrell's desperate action. Ichor dripped from the scaly, barely fleshed skull that almost appeared to have been stretched long. Two wicked scaled horns rose high above bat-winged ears. Above the deathly crevices that were all that formed a nose, the thick-browed orbs of the demon lord glared at the impotent human, the hatred and evil within them matching exactly that of the horrified mercenary had noted in the image of the false archangel Miracotis. Diablo thundered his wrath once more and vanished as swiftly as he had appeared. With a howl of agony, the vision of Juris Khan completely collapsed. The regal garments darkened and shredded. The skin had been left to grow so brittle it fell off in thousands of pieces. Lord Khan put his other hand to his breast, as if somehow to stop the inevitable. And then the entire giant crumbled into a jumble of fragmented bones and scraps of cloth. The last vestiges of Khan's image vanished. Kentrell found himself falling again. Down and down he dropped, descending so fast he could scarcely breathe. The shattered ruins of the once resurrected kingdom beckoned him. Kentrell shut his eyes, praying that in the end it would be swift and relatively painless. Just as he expected to hit, the terrified fighter suddenly halted once again. Captain Dumas' eyes opened wide. About 100 feet or so below him, the roofless remnants of a rounded structure met his stunned gaze. No sooner that he registered that Kentrell began to drop, but at a slower, almost cautious rate. He looked around, trying to find the cause of this miracle. The still shadowed palace of Juris Khan greeted him. Somehow, the light of the crystal had managed to avoid the towering structure, but now true dawn had finally arrived, and the first rays of the day had already begun to eat away at the last of the false darkness. Kentrell might not have thought more of the edifice's demise, but then he saw the figure poised at the very edge of the grand balcony, a figure with flowing red hair. Even so far apart, their eyes locked. Kentrell saw in Atana's a combination of emotions that left him so startled that at first he did not realize that she continued to lower him to safety. Only when a brief, sad smile escaped her otherwise solemn expression did he understand all she had done. The light began to pour over the palace. Kentrell felt himself drop faster, but not so fast that he risked death. Atana leaned over the rail, her arm outstretched toward him. Although he knew that Juris Khan's daughter did not seek his hand, Captain Dumont could not help but reaching for her. Atana gave him another deep smile. The sun touched her. As it rose up her body, Atana simply faded away. At that point, the ground hilltop palace of Juris Khan collapsed in upon itself, quickly reduced to dust and ancient rubble. The hill itself seemed to almost deflate, and without Atana's spell to maintain his descent, Kentrell Dumont dropped like a stone toward the ground.